Today, I'm delighted to introduce Justin, or reintroduce you. You know him from such workshops as Help Me Find a Job and Do You Know This Person? Justin is a recent, he recently landed, and so he's got a job. And so we've asked him to explain in his words kind of his narrative journey and what specifically, so be thinking about how does his story apply to you? What changed in his approach or what changed in his philosophy that you can use and how you can apply it? So that's what today is about. So be sure to ask questions about those types of things. Justin, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us where you landed and tell us about how that journey happened?
Yeah, I can go ahead and jump right into it. So hello everyone. I'm Justin Mason. So I'm a Air Force veteran, recently separated, and kind of like Alan said, today I'm gonna just share like my journey. So hopefully that someone can take away something from it. And since I'm an engineer, I like structure, so I actually have some slides to go along. So if that's okay, I'll share that. And let that be kind of my. All right, can everyone see the slides? Did I do that correctly? All right, good. All right. So like I said, I'm just, this presentation is all about my job search. And to start off, I have a little disclaimer, is that I'm not a job search expert by any means. And, I hope that by sharing this, there's something you can take from it, but I could very easily just be back in someone else's seat. So don't, I'm not like, I'm happy to share, but I don't want to like have any preconceived notions that I am a guru in any of this. But any questions I'm willing to answer about my journey and, how it might apply to you. And kind of going on top of that is the goals for this. So obviously, since I have a speaking platform, my number one goal is to tell my life story. No, not really, because no one wants to hear that. So everyone's here for a reason. And, my number one goal is something along my story can help you out in your job search. And, if you're more seasoned at this job searching than me, you might have covered everything, gone through everything that I've gone through. And so if nothing else, then my second goal is just to provide a motivational boost, because I know that when you're in the middle of job searching, it kind of feels like this as you're going on. It can be very disillusioning. So if nothing else, my story can help provide that little, motivation to keep you powering through the, constant rejection it seems like when you are going through that process. Okay, so first I'll go into my background and just, enough to obviously not tell my whole life story, but know where I'm coming from and understand the challenges that I had. So I spent 11 years active duty as a developmental engineer in the Air Force. And so kind of what is that? A developmental engineer is a pretty generic term. And basically my job is to build, weapon systems, equipment, like whatever it is that the Air Force warfighter needs to do their job to get an unfair advantage over the adversaries. You need an engineer who's doing everything from the research, the design, the production, testing, to the sustainment of that. So it kind of spans that, but it's all kind of the support, right? Like the support of building those weapon systems, doing the research to provide a design to the customer. The nice thing about that is, as a developmental engineer, it has a pretty one-to-one transferable, like easy to translate skills over to the civilian market. As far as, an engineer in the Air Force provides a similar role to what industry does. And in fact, as a military representative, like we worked with those counterparts in industry, because ultimately, the Air Force doesn't design airplanes. It's Lockheed Martin or Boeing, they're the ones that design it. So we work pretty hand in hand with those contractors. But as I'll talk about later, there are still some unique challenges when transitioning from a military role in there. Okay, so that's what I did for 11 years, and then kind of set the stage for me getting out, because it plays into a little bit of how things went. So my last assignment, it was February 2019. I got my next follow-on assignment, and I had 7 days to basically decide whether I was going to stay in and get out. My wife and I have been talking about this for a while, so we decided to stay in, or we decided to get out. Sorry, we decided to get out, and I'm putting my paperwork, which starts the ball rolling. And so a ball that you can't get back once it starts rolling. And a little bit of perspective, here is the unemployment rates history from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. When I joined the military and I commissioned back in 2009, you can see we were at like the height of that recession. Now, obviously, like I didn't make the decision right there. That's when I joined college, but kind of me and my friends who graduated and going into the military, looking at a lot of friends from high school that, chose other paths. When the recession went on, we were kind of like, whew, like, we dodged that bullet. That was, we kind of got lucky, like going to the military. That's awesome. Good for us. Well, obviously we fast forward that timeline, and you can see that the peak of that was not the worst yet to come. And when I decided to leave the military was in February 2009. And obviously we all know what happened then. So it just goes to show you that you never know what's going to happen. And going kind of there is, in takeaways, you can't plan for everything. So obviously, like my vision, like when I was getting out, is like, hey, I'm going to be, industry, be this, get into business. And then my reality was, as things were going on, and I started the job process, ahead of time, and just like everyone at first is like, oh, this is going to be a couple of months, with the pandemic. They were so good to still have these conversations, to the slow realization that this is going to be a long haul effort. And the conversations became, we're just not, we're trying not to fire our own employees right now. We don't really have any openings. So based on combinations of both the job market and some family reasons at home, the reality was I was going to be a stay-at-home dad for the next year. So you can't really plan for everything. When I put in those papers in February 2019, I had a different vision for how my job career transition was going to progress. But as we all know, life happens, and I had to make a pivot. And the key, when you're in the Air Force, one of the statements you hear over and over again is that flexibility is the key to air power. Well, just like anything in life, being flexible and adaptable is a key attribute to have. So I had initial plans to separate right into a career transition, but because of the pandemic, we decided that I would stay home for a year. And my new goal was, okay, my oldest, I have 3 kids, 6 and under, and my oldest is going to be starting kindergarten in fall of 2021. So my new targeted timeline was like, okay, stay home with the kids, and then try to get a job to line up with him going back to school in the fall, and my other 2 going to daycare. So fast forward a year, and we have Job Hunt Part 2. And this time, I'll kind of go through like my strategy towards the job hunt and my challenges, and then finally like my success story. So just like Iron Man, I am like Captain America, I'm de-thawing out of the ice. I'm like waking up, and kind of like I had built these networking ties up, and now I'm trying to like restart all this summer of 2020. First I want to set up my motivation for my strategy. And One of them was this book that I read called What Color is Your Parachute? And this helped me put in perspective, coming from the military, you never have to do the things you need to do to get a job. So this kind of helped me put in perspective, like what was key. And there were a couple of key takeaways from that book that helped me focus what I should be doing. And I'll show it here. So the first is they had this chart in there, which it's this upside down pyramid. And if you look on the left side with the orange numbers, they say this for an employer. So someone, who's trying to find workers, like this is their order of preference of how they like to fulfill a job. The top you have like, hey, hire someone from within, either a full-time company promoting them or someone who was they used to work with that they have demonstrated performance in like the actual relative environment, to all the way at the bottom with their number 6, which is just using a resume, from whatever means online or process. And then on the opposite side was, hey, this is kind of traditional how people go about job hunting. And you have the number 1, which is looking at job postings online and submitting resumes, all the way up to number 6. And the point here was that the way we job hunt, or at least the way we've traditionally job hunt, is kind of at direct odds with how a company like wants to fill positions. And by realizing that, you're kind of setting the stage for what should I be focusing my time on. And a couple other key things I'll point out. And remember, I am an engineer after all, so get ready for some numbers, is these stats. So they said, based on historical job searching data, that the success rate of landing a job by just doing your internet job posting, like applying to a website, whether it be the company specific website or, like a ZipRecruiter or Indeed company website like that, was just a 4% success rate. If you use some sort of like, headhunter agency or search firms to help you find it, depending on, what agency, could vary from 5% to, 28% if they're really good. And then finally, like asking for job leads, AKA kind of like networking with people, seeing what was available out there, had a 33% success rate. So kind of what this told me was that if, I wanted to know where to best spend my efforts, like if you would have asked me before doing any of this, like what would I have done to job searching? Like it would just be like, okay, like let's get my resume really good. Let's go to the websites, find out where the jobs are and start applying. But reading this book kind of put in perspective, like, hey, that's not the best approach. Not only is it the lowest percentage of like success rate of getting a job, but when you look at an employer's, like how they want to hire you, that is like the bottom of their list, because that's a risk to them because they don't know you. That's a whole resume and interview process is try to get to know you, but they prefer to hire someone that they already know can do a good job. So bottom line, what this told me is the greatest chance of getting hired is equal, networking. The highest chance of getting a job, and that's kind of how you could climb the ladder and get yourself known to a company. So that was my motivation. So I'll kind of talk a little bit about my networking strategy. So I'm a structured person, so it's important to me to see progress. So when I was going out in these networking meetings, I wanted to have some sort of notes to see like how am I making that progress. And I had done my research and I knew like the location. Being an engineer, I wanted to stay in an aerospace industry, and identified my top 5 companies in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. But when I started doing my networking to try to get in contact with one of those companies, I use this mind mapping software online. There's lots of ones. I use a website called Coggle. It was free. And for me, what it helped me do is just putting, sometimes when I found during job search, it seems like you're just doing things and it's hard to tell if what you're doing is making progress. And for me, I wanted to know that at least I was working towards something. So I built this um, mind map, both to help me see the progress and help keep things organized. And so you can kind of see you have me in the center. And then I've for this, I've taken out the names of all the people and just kind of left it generic. But you can kind of see like I would map out like if I had a networking meeting or someone like gave me a meeting, like, I talked to this person and talked to this person, and I talked to this person, which led me to a company that, maybe I had applied to the job there or something, or I talked to a group, whether that be like a LinkedIn group or, a group like this, like Eagle Group, or, there's tons of other different groups out there that would connect me with a person. And it helped me visualize like, hey, I'm growing my network as I talk to these people. And even if a person, doesn't lead somewhere, I can at least see the fruits of my labor of that. I'm increasing my end results of the number of chances I have at getting closer to that one person that can be, the key to landing the job. Also, as another benefit, like sometimes when you have multiple networking meetings going on at the same time, it can be you're trying to remember like, okay, who is this person again, and how did I meet, like how did I get in contact with them. And so this was another way to help me organize that, so I could remember like, okay, this is the way it went there. And as far as my networking strategy, so obviously, and if you've been a part of this group, you're familiar with like the 20-minute networking meeting. And that was it was actually someone who went to this meeting that gave me that book and said, hey, here, do this. And so definitely agree. I'm not going to go over any of those, what's in that book, because that was an awesome guide. But as far as like who to contact, this was my 4 main areas. So I think the first 2 are pretty obvious, like family and friends. Those were the most fruitful as far as like contacting me with people that were well-meaning and had more influence. But I think that unless you're lucky enough that those people that your friends and family know are in the industries or the right companies to get there, like I think that's a pretty obvious one for for most people. And I think the challenge is that if you're looking for a job, you don't have that easy connection. And it's about how you go, like the challenge is how do you go make that connection without having someone that you know of to get there. And that's where I really utilized the bottom 2, which was LinkedIn, and just groups like this, like groups like Eagles Group or alumni associations, or something like that that could put you in touch with more people that had a wider net and really spread your network out to try to get there. So I'll touch base on that again and come back to it more. So my challenge, given this, was that being in the military, even though I talked about before, like developmental engineer had pretty good one-to-one translatable, like there's a job outside that does basically the same thing as civilian wise. I still had that trouble coming up against that experience filter where, hey, in the military, even as someone like, quote unquote, specialized as me as like an engineer, got my bachelor's and master's in aeronautical engineering. So obviously I had to get pretty specialized in my education and schooling. But for actual like work experience, it's your traditional military. We wanted you to have a mild wide experience. So you do this job for 2 to 3 years. Okay, do this job for 2 to 3 years. Whereas when I was talking, a lot of both the job postings and people I talk to in industry, right? You see on there, hey, we want you to have XXX years experience in this one sector. So even though I might have had, 11 years of experience as an engineer in the Air Force, I rarely did I ever have like this amount of experience in this specific domain that they wanted. And that kind of led me up against this experience filter where it's like, how do I break in, and whether that's a computer filter or, even just like a person filter, whatever it may be, like it just kind of butting up against like, how do I get past this filter so that I can prove that, okay, I might not have the traditional this experience in this career, but what I have, you know, is valuable, and I can explain how these experiences map to what you want. So, it's like, how do you get that foot in the door to give you that opportunity? And you may recall, I said my strategy was networking, but I still applied, right? Like I still did the, like, let's just post to go to job searchings in the meantime. I sent about probably 10 to 20 applications in the first month and had one screening interview. And the only reason I had that screening interview is because the hiring manager had a contract with an Air Force customer, and they basically like, oh, you're from the Air Force. Like, let me just, see what you are. So that was, just a screening interview, in the job. What they were looking for didn't match up with my experience. So it was frustrating because, how do you get your foot in the door to prove to someone? I felt like if I could get into, more interviews, then I could do a better job of explaining versus like what I am on paper. So I was kind of coming up again to that, whole frustration of, it's hard to gain that momentum. You just keep hitting these like roadblock after roadblock after roadblock without making any sort of appreciable progress that you can look and say, hey, look, it's not like I had more and more and more interviews. But in the meantime, I continued to do the networking, continue to grow my network, because that was my overall strategy. But at the same time, like, it was reaching that point where it was getting a little disillusioned, a little frustrated with everything, even though in relative terms, I hadn't been at it that long. So after a while of not getting past any of those foot in the door, either, from just applying online or networking, I started to widen my search. So before, I was looking for huge companies, like big companies that were the engineering defense contractors like Honeywell's, Northrop Grumman, companies like that. And I wanted to see like what else was in the area. And that's where I found a company called Saffron online. And I don't know. And so through this meeting, I met, or through like the Eagle Group, I met Gabrielle, and he was in a similar situation. He was engineer, also looking for kind of like a research role. And he gave me some good advice as far as like, if you don't have a contact at a company, was focusing on fellow veterans. And he gave me a good like little script that he would send to people through LinkedIn messaging. And he said he normally had a pretty good success rate of at least setting up a networking meeting based off that. So I found this company called Saffron, but I didn't really know much about them because it was a small company and less than 100 employees, like locally here. And so I just wanted to find out more about it. So I kind of took his advice and took his message, tailored it to myself, and then sent it to someone. I found a veteran at the company and sent a message to them, basically saying like, hey, just transitioning. Would love to, find out more about the company, the culture, your experience as a veteran there, etc. And had a great response back. So the person said, yeah, let's set up a meeting. So we set up a call. And he kind of went the extra mile. He's like, hey, why don't you come out and do a tour here, and I can like give you a tour of the place. I'm like, yeah, that'd be awesome. Like, and so he kind of went out of his way to do that. And so we had set up to do an in-person tour. And then the day before that this tour is supposed to happen, my son tested positive for COVID. And he was fine and everything. Like, he is the second time having it, so he had no symptoms. But it just kind of felt like, I was like, oh, great. Like, I felt like I was making some momentum, I was going to do it. And then like, I just like kind of got beaten down again. It's like, man, like, I got separated during COVID, and then this is a year later, and COVID is still kind of like hit me when I'm down. So I was like, okay, like, we can still do a phone call. Can't go, but as you know, like, the more face-to-face is a little bit more personal. You can communicate a little bit better there, but phone call is better than nothing. So I set up a phone call, and it went really well. He gave me a lot of good information about it. And when I was on the call with him, I had looked just to see what openings they had, and they had two roles, an engineering and a project manager role. And I just kind of asked them informally over there, like, hey, finding more information about the company. What do these type of roles entail? Just like, what do they do? And that's pretty much it. Like, I didn't apply for anything. I just wanted to know information about the company. Well, about an hour after I had that conversation, I got a call from their HR department, wanting to schedule an interview for those positions that I talked about, and which would like took me off guard because, like I said, I hadn't even applied. And so I was like, yeah, sure. So it kind of went from, this feeling of frustration, to kind of like this feeling of like, okay, well, maybe something's happening, here. And, but things move fast. So I had that networking call, on Wednesday, and then they scheduled the interview for Thursday. And so far, I had focused on my transition on making sure I had a really good resume and focusing on like my networking skills and where I can network and researching about companies to find the right companies. But since I hadn't really made much progress at all in getting into interviews, my interviewing skills I had neglected. And now I found myself in a point where I had less than 24 hours to prepare for. It was a screening interview with HR, so it wasn't like a final round, but still, like I'd basically done like little to none preparation, when it comes to interview skills. So that night did as much prep as I could, but that first interview was rough, at least by my standards. It was rough. I can be kind of perfectionist. And this is basically my first ever interview for a job, because, coming to the military, I don't have to interview for that. And so this being my first civilian job, I just didn't have that much practice. And I answered the questions a little bit too literally, as far as, they were telling me about a time we needed this. And kind of as I said before, I didn't have like those neat packages like, okay, like this is like one-to-one translatable skills, but like what the skills they had, I had experiences there. I just had to do a little bit of translation of like, okay, what you're asking me about this, and really what you want to know is they're looking for a time when I demonstrated the skills that they need. And so trying to pivot that question and be like, okay, like this is how I can answer that question from the translating like what I did in the military there. It's not exactly one-to-one what you're asking, but this is what you want to hear. And I just got I knew that going into the interview, but it was one thing when you know something, and it's another thing when you put it in the practice. And kind of just had a little bit of a deer in the headlights moment in there, and just got laser focused on what the question was. So I didn't have a great feeling coming out of that interview. So it was like second interview, like, I don't know. And you're sitting there waiting, just waiting to see if you get a phone call or not. Which luckily a week later I did get a second call for a second interview. And this one was going to be, because it's a small company, it was going to be with the CEO of the company. So that kind of put me on like even more like, oh man, like I really need to practice. So I got a second chance and, did practice. Came on here, and Lana helped me. She did some interview prep with me, got to do a little, pre-practice interview with her to help me polish up my skills. And just the combination of like the interview practice and being a lot more prepared, like I felt like I went into that interview and did a lot better than I did before. And I turned into a job offer a week later. So things move very fast. And my perspective, I went from very disillusioned, like having nothing, to networking call, interview, second interview, job offer, and it all happened like that. So this is my perspective on the whole thing. Is it's frustrating because you feel like you're in this loop sometimes of like, I need experience to get the job, but I need to get that experience, I need to have a job. It's just like chicken and the egg. Like, how do I get there? It's just frustrating. um how do you get that foot in the door, like I talked about? And for me, it just all came down to almost like a numbers game, like trying to detach myself from every resume that I sent or every application that I put in or every call that I have as like an evaluation of like whether or not I was good enough for the job, and just think of it as they're trying to fill roles, I'm trying to fill roles, and like the more I can do to increase the number of opportunities I have at a position, whether that be through online or through networking, the faster I'm going to get to that one opportunity that is going to lead to the job that I want. And that's why networking is going to get you there faster than just applying online, because generally it's a higher success rate just from people's experience. And I mean, if you look at my experience, I never applied for the job that I got officially, right? Like I never went online and put in my resume. I sent my resume to the person I had a networking call. He brought it down to HR and just, he never even, he just kind of talked to them, be like, hey, I talked to this person. He's interested in these roles. Here's his resume. He was really good. It's basically what he told them. And then they just reached out to me and said, hey, we think you'd be awesome. So it was like networking. Like I went to this, like I thought I had to do the online application. And in fact, like because of the networking, like I got a job I wanted without even officially applying for it. And how to get those networking meetings, because that was another problem. I'm sure everyone exhausts their friends and family list pretty quickly because that's who you know. That's the first place you're going to utilize. But then how do you create those opportunities at places you don't have? And that's why I would say utilize, like for me, LinkedIn was huge. But there's obviously other networking, but it's like utilizing common ground to generate, because I feel like it's hard to have that cold, like, hey, will you just meet with me? It's kind of like a very cold start. And so if you utilize the common ground you have with that, and I think like being in the military was like a great thing, because I would based on the advice of people, like targeting them through LinkedIn got a much better response rate than just like targeting someone saying, hey, like, can I find out more about your company? Like I'm looking for a job. Because like veterans are more willing to help out other veterans. And this person was a Navy veteran and he was awesome at just tell me straight up how it is. But other, outside of military, like alumni, if you went to college, and you can look up like on LinkedIn, like, hey, they're alumni at the college, that's another great, just any sort of common ground that you can find between that person and you, just to at least initiate that conversation to get your foot in the door. And you never know where it's going to lead. I didn't even go into this meeting trying to like find if um like with specifically like, hey, I'm looking for a job. I went into this meeting like I don't know much about the company. I just want to see if it's a good fit. And I came out with an interview. Um, which leads me to my next one, or actually is well, two things. One, it's not a linear progression. So you don't expect to see like, okay, I'm doing this and I got more interviews and then I get more interviews and then all of a sudden, like it just keeps growing and growing and growing and you get more, interest and interest and before you finally get the job. That's just not how it works. A lot of times it's just like it just seems like you're throwing stuff to the wind and all of a sudden like something sticks and lands. So you never know when that next meeting is going to be the one meeting that gets you the job. So don't get disillusioned if you don't see the progress, because it doesn't, it'd be nice if it kind of grew like that and you just kept getting more and more interest. But a lot of times it just, bam, you just got to hit the right thing. Which leads to my next one, which is don't wait on the interview, practice like I did. There might be times when you're in between, you don't know what to work on, and it may seem like you're far off away from the interview, but don't wait, because in my instance, I went from having like no prospects to having an interview lined up, and I had less than 24 hours to prepare. And that could have been, if I did poorly enough in there, or they had better candidates in mind, like that could have been, I could have been screened from that first interview and that was a missed opportunity. Like, and you don't want to waste any of those, because obviously everyone knows like just how few opportunities it seems like you do get when you're in the job hunt. And so don't wait to build those skills until you need them. That's something you can continue to work on, so that if you have something pop up impromptu, you're ready to respond to that. And then my last takeaway is stay connected. So obviously everyone's here in the Eagle group because, you know, they're great tips and increasing those networking opportunities and lots of things to help you. But besides from like the practical ways that this group can help you get a job, this group and groups like it, I think the other value was just the mental aspect of keeping you motivated. Because when you are in that job hunt experience, after a while, like even if you're just all you're doing is just posting online resume or, you know, applications, it can be frustrating and you can kind of feel like man, like I'm not, yeah. I think inside our heads, like everyone's like, we're kind of at least I do. I go to like a worst case scenario. Like you apply to a bunch of interviews, like I'm never going to get a job. Like I want to be, you know, for the next 2 years, I'll be doing this. I'll never get a job because it doesn't seem like anything. But coming here, networking and, you know, just having a community of people who are going through that together, sharing the same things, and the people on the other side that are trying to help and coach you along was very helpful for me. And staying connected, because I know that like I'm like going back to my previous, like I'm not an expert and I could easily just be on the, you know, we're one bad recession away and I could easily just be on the opposite side of the coin and be right back in the seat, you know, 2 months from now. Because who knows, you can't plan your whole life out. So that's what helped me. That's my story. So any questions? And there's my LinkedIn profile if anyone wants to. I'll try to post it in the chat too if anyone wants to connect. So that's all I have.
Justin, thank you very much for doing that, man. That's a